All right, get ready because you've sent in some seriously heavy stuff this time, folks. We're diving deep into antifragility.
Yeah, anti-fragility. Not a word you hear every day, right?
Not exactly. But it's a big deal in Nassim Taleb's Antifragile. We'll also be pulling from Fortune's Formula by William Poundstone and The Black Swan, also by Taleb.
Think of this deep dive as your crash course in, well, not breaking.
Exactly. We'll unpack what antifragility is, why you should care, and maybe even,
How to use it, make it work for you.
yeah, perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
so first things first, what's fragile? I mean, we all know a tiny teacup is in trouble if it hits the floor.
Right. But in these sources, fragility, well, it's more than just breaking easily. It's about being harmed by disorder, by volatility, randomness.
Those china teacups, they can't take a hit.
Exactly.
But a rubber ball, though,
Now that bounces back.
that's more robust.
Yeah, robust.
So then anti-fragility, that's got to be like bouncing back even better, like almost like a superpower.
Yeah.
Right?
You got it. It's not just surviving chaos, it's actually gaining from it. Think about, like, our immune systems.
okay.
Exposure to bacteria, within reason, it can actually make them stronger. And Taleb's argument, his big argument, is that any complex system that's survived for a long time, whether it's our bodies, markets, ideas even, probably has this anti-fragility built in.
Built in. Okay, so how do we get some of that?
Yeah, how do we...
Optionality seems to be a key idea in Antifragile.
Yeah.
And there's that story about Thales, the philosopher.
Oh, Thales.
I gotta admit, I was a bit confused by that one.
Well, it really shows how optionality can be brilliant.
Yeah.
Thales, he didn't try to predict the future. He just set himself up to benefit no matter what happened.
He basically put a down payment on every single olive press before anyone knew if the harvest would be good, right?
Right.
And then bumper crop, boom, he makes bank renting them out.
It's all about maximizing asymmetry. More room for gain, less for loss. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket based on a prediction. That's a core principle of anti-fragility.
So instead of trying to, like, control every little thing perfectly, maybe it's smarter to have a few different, I don't know, irons in the fire.
Irons in the fire. I like that.
Like diversifying your skills,
Yeah.
income streams, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Backup plans, side hustle, skills that you can use in different areas. That's all about building optionality into your life.
So fragile things break, robust things withstand, and anti-fragile things actually level up when things get messy. I like that.
I like it too.
But the sources also talk about this triad. What's that all about?
Oh, the triad. Well, Taleb uses it to classify how systems respond to stress. The fragile, we know, they can't handle it. Robust things, well, they can take a punch, but they don't necessarily get better because of it.
Okay.
And then there's the anti-fragile.
Well, superstars.
They get stronger from those hits. It's like the difference between, say, a house of cards, a brick wall, and, a muscle getting stronger after a workout.
And you can't always know what specific risk is coming, right?
Right.
But you can see how fragile something is by how it reacts to stress.
Yeah.
It's like that quote from Antifragile. Fragility is quite measurable, risk not so at all, particularly risk associated with rare events.
There you go. You don't know when the earthquake is coming, but you can build a foundation that can handle it.
Makes sense.
Or, here's a more modern example. Think about Silicon Valley, that whole startup culture.
Okay.
They've embraced failure as, a part of innovation. Each failed startup teaches valuable lessons, and that makes the whole ecosystem more resilient, more adaptable.
So it's not just about surviving a storm, it's what you learn from it.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't some level of control necessary? Like, we can't just let everything be chaotic all the time, can we?
That is where things get really interesting. Antifragile and the Black Swan, they both warn us about the dangers of trying to suppress natural volatility.
Okay.
It's like holding a beach ball underwater. Eventually, all that pressure is going to cause a much bigger splash.
You're saying trying to control everything too tightly might actually make us more vulnerable.
Exactly. Think about the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Some experts say it was partly caused by, trying to eliminate risk in the housing market. Those efforts, they backfired, created hidden vulnerabilities that, well, led to a massive collapse.
So instead of eliminating risk, maybe we should be learning how to manage it.
Manage it, adapt, learn. That's a key part of anti-fragility. Instead of fearing uncertainty, what if we learn to see it as, I don't know, a source of opportunity?
This makes me think about when I've tried to plan every detail of a trip and then things go hilariously wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Those often turn out to be the best stories.
Right. The detours lead to the best discoveries.
It's true.
It reminds me of that quote from Antifragile about iatrogenics, this idea that sometimes, our attempts to fix things, whether it's medical treatment or economic policy, it can actually cause more harm than good.
Whoa. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of scary. Can you give an example?
Sure. Taleb argues that, unnecessary medical procedures can be a prime example of this iatrogenics. Meant to help, but sometimes they can lead to side effects, unforeseen side effects, that outweigh the benefits.
So how do we know when to step in and when to let things play out?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
It's about finding that sweet spot between control and letting go. And it's a question we'll continue to explore as we dive deeper into these sources.
Okay, I am ready. Where do we head next in our journey toward anti-fragility?
Well, one tool Taleb gives us for all this is it's called skin in the game.
Skin in the game.
Yeah, you see it in Antifragile, the Black Swan, and Fortune's Formula. Simple idea, but powerful.
It does sound pretty intuitive, like having something to lose if things go wrong.
Yeah.
But these sources, they're saying it's deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's about accountability, consequences, aligning incentives even. When you've got skin in the game, you're more invested, right?
Right.
So you tend to think more carefully about the risks, the potential downsides.
It's like the difference between just giving advice and actually putting your own money on the line, Like that story from Fortune's Formula about the casino owner trying to cheat Ed Thorpe at blackjack.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah.
That story really shows how powerful skin in the game can be. Thorpe was betting his own money, so he had every reason to be on top of his game, call out any funny business.
Right. He wasn't messing around with someone else's chips.
Exactly. Makes you wonder, are there areas in our lives where we lack skin in the game? Decisions where the consequences might fall more on someone else?
That's a good question. Taleb, he argues that lack of skin in the game can lead to, like, reckless behavior.
Godless behavior, yeah.
And even make systems more fragile.
Oh, absolutely. Think about policymakers who create policies that don't actually affect them personally.
Okay.
Or businesses that are all about short-term profits, even if it means sacrificing long-term sustainability. Not a lot of skin in the game there.
So how do we apply this to our own lives then? I mean, investing, sure, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
But how do we get more skin in the game in, I don't know, everyday decisions?
It's about owning our choices, really understanding what could happen, good or bad.
Okay.
Could be something as simple as being more careful about what projects we take on at work, making sure we have a real stake in their success. Or maybe it's about investing in relationships where both people are willing to put in the effort, to be vulnerable.
It's like being all in, not just dipping your toes in.
Exactly.
But Taleb, he also talks about measuring fragility. How do we actually do that?
Well, he says to look for what he calls convexity or concavity. It's about how a system responds to stress.
Okay.
Think of it this way. If a system benefits way more from good events than it suffers from bad ones, it's probably anti-fragile, convex, as he calls it.
I'm going to need an example for that one.
Sure. Imagine a small business owner, right? A really great review from some, popular influencer. It could lead to a huge surge in sales, right? Big win.
Yeah, that's a big win.
But then on the other hand, a bad health inspection, that could shut them down completely. Devastating loss. That kind of asymmetry, it suggests fragility.
So to be more anti-fragile, we should look for situations where the potential upside, it's much bigger than the potential downside.
You got it. And this all ties back into optionality,
Yeah.
Having multiple options, it lets you benefit from those unexpected good events without being completely wiped out by the bad ones.
This makes me think about that classic question, like working for a big company versus starting your own business.
Yeah, that age-old dilemma.
Stable job, yeah, you get that predictable income, but maybe not a lot of room to grow. Entrepreneurship, that's risky, but there's potential for, like, exponential growth, right?
Absolutely. Starting a business, it lets you adapt, pivot, capitalize on opportunities you didn't even see coming. Those are all hallmarks of anti-fragility. Big companies, they often struggle with that kind of flexibility.
But hold on, didn't we talk about how suppressing volatility can actually lead to fragility? How does that apply in the business world?
Right. Well, Taleb he's really critical of what he calls the Soviet Harvard delusion. It's this idea that we can control these complex systems like economies, businesses through top-down policies, interventions. He says those attempts to eliminate risk, they often backfire.
How so? Can you give me like a concrete example?
Sure, think about government bailouts for big corporations. Might seem necessary in the short term, right?
Right.
But they can create this moral hazard where businesses take huge risks knowing they'll be rescued if things go south.
So they become dependent on those interventions, like
Mm.
less able to weather future shocks on their own.
Exactly. They lose their natural antifragility. It's like protecting a tree from every little bit of wind and every storm. Might seem helpful, but the tree actually ends up weaker, more likely to get damaged in the long run.
This whole idea of embracing randomness is so,
Uh-huh.
so counterintuitive. It's like the opposite of what we're taught about planning, managing risk, striving for stability, all that.
And yet, look at nature. Randomness, volatility, it's all essential for growth, adaptation. I mean, think about evolution. Species that can't adapt to change, they died out. The ones that can adapt, they thrive.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light here. Maybe instead of being afraid of uncertainty, we should try to see it as, I don't know, a potential strength. But we've been talking a lot about like businesses and systems.
Yeah.
How does all this apply to our personal lives?
It's about finding that balance, between being cautious and taking risks.
Right.
Avoiding situations where one single failure could wipe you out completely, but also, being willing to step outside your comfort zone to experiment.
So not putting all our eggs in one basket. More like creating a portfolio of options. Some safe, some a bit more risky.
That's a great way to put it. And that actually brings us to another concept from the sources, the barbell strategy.
The barbell strategy.
Yeah, imagine a barbell, right? Weights on either end.
Okay.
In this case, one side is your safe, low-risk stuff like government bonds, maybe. The other side, that's your high-risk, high-reward stuff.
So it's about balancing those extremes, not trying to find some perfect middle ground.
Exactly. You had your bets, protect yourself from huge losses, but you still have a chance for some big wins.
I like how this applies to so many different areas, not just investing. It's like having a stable job for security, but also, I don't know, working on a passion project on the side. When one doesn't work out, you got the other one.
There you go, the barbell strategy in action. And the best part, if both work out, you're in even better shape. It's about creating a system that can actually benefit from both stability and volatility.
This is really starting to click for me now. We've been talking a lot about building antifragility, like right now. But the sources, they also talk about the importance of time, of history.
Oh, absolutely. Taleb, he says time is both a destroyer and a creator. Fragile things, they tend to break down over time. Anti-fragile things, they actually benefit from time passing. They adapt, they evolve, they get stronger.
So if we look back at history, we can get some clues about what's truly antifragile, like ancient wisdom traditions, philosophical ideas that have been around forever.
Exactly. They've been through countless challenges, stressors, all that, but they survived. They thrived even. Those medieval buildings we talked about before. Or how the restaurant industry is constantly changing. The ones that survive, they've gotten stronger, more resilient through all that adaptation.
What about the things that haven't stood the test of time then?
Those are probably the fragile ones, right? The ones that couldn't adapt, so they got eliminated. Outdated technology, bad business models, ideas that just couldn't hold up, they all fall by the wayside.
So history is like a survival of the fittest test for ideas, for systems.
It's a testing ground for everything. Ideas, institutions, even social norms. And the things that make it through, they often have those principles of antifragility built in.
This reminds me of Taleb's Lindy effect. Basically, the longer something's been around, the longer it's likely to stick around. It's a pretty interesting way to look at things.
It is. And it suggests that things that have stood the test of time, they've got this built-in resilience. Not guaranteed to last forever, but their track record, it says a lot.
This adds a whole new layer to how we think about building antifragility in our own lives.
Oh,
right?
it does.
It's not just about the choices we make right now. It's about choices that can last.
Choices that can last, yeah. It encourages us to think about the legacy we're building. For ourselves and for future generations even. Will our decisions still be good in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
That's a big question. We've been focusing on the practical side of all this, but I'm wondering, is there an ethical side to antifragility too?
That is a great point. Taleb really emphasizes that true antifragility. It's not just about, personal gain. It's about thinking about how our actions affect others, affect the systems we're all a part of.
So it's not just about making ourselves less fragile. It's about building a world that's more resilient, more ethical even.
Exactly. He says that systems that take advantage of others or just shift risk onto someone else, they're ultimately fragile. They might benefit in the short term, but they create those hidden vulnerabilities that can lead to collapse, a systemic collapse.
Like companies that prioritize profits over things like environmental sustainability or how they treat their workers.
You might look successful for a while, but their actions, they have negative consequences. Ultimately, it harms everyone, including themselves. They're not truly anti-fragile because they're not making the whole system healthier, more resilient.
So to really build antifragility, we have to make choices that benefit not just us, but the communities we're in, the environment, all of it.
Absolutely. It's about creating systems and making choices that are good for everyone, not just a select few.
This really adds another dimension to how we understand antifragility. It's not just about individual resilience, it's about collective well-being.
It is. It really challenges us to think beyond just the short-term gains, to really consider the long-term consequences of our actions.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I'm really starting to see the world in a whole new light.
That's the power of these ideas. They can really change how we see things, empower us to handle complexity, uncertainty with more confidence, more resilience.
I'm excited to keep learning about all this and see how I can apply it to my own life. But before we wrap up, there's one last point from the sources I want to touch on. It's that idea that, maybe modernity has actually made us too fragile.
Too fragile.
Yeah, by trying to get rid of all the volatility, like we've engineered all the risk and randomness out of our lives.
Right.
But in these sources, it seems like that might have backfired, you know?
Yeah, it's like that saying, smooth seas don't make skillful sailors. If we try to make everything perfectly smooth and predictable, well, we might be making ourselves more vulnerable to those inevitable storms.
So then the question is, how do we bring back a healthy dose of randomness? Not recklessly, obviously, but in a way that pushes us to grow.
It's about finding those opportunities for small experiments, getting outside our comfort zones a little bit, being open to new experiences. Maybe it's taking a different route to work or, I don't know, trying a new hobby or even just having a conversation with someone who sees things differently than you do.
I like that. It's about breaking out of those routines, those predictable patterns that can make us complacent, maybe even a little bit fragile. It reminds me of when I decided to learn to surf. It was terrifying at first, and I wiped out a lot. But every time I got back up, I felt a little bit stronger, like I could handle whatever wave came at me next.
That's a great example. Taking on those small challenges, even if they're a little uncomfortable, even if there's a chance you might fail, that's how we build those anti-fragile muscles.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into anti-fragility, what are the key takeaways you hope listeners will walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing is to change how we think about uncertainty. Instead of seeing it as something to be afraid of, to avoid, what if we embraced it as just a natural part of life, maybe even as a potential source of strength, of growth.
It's like we're giving ourselves permission to not have all the answers,
Right.
to be okay with not knowing exactly what's coming next.
Exactly. And we've got tools to help us with that, Things like optionality, skin in the game, the barbell strategy. These aren't just, abstract ideas. They're practical things we can actually use in our lives to become more resilient, more adaptable.
And let's not forget that ethical side of anti-fragility.
Right, right.
It's not just about us individually. It's about building systems and making choices that are good for everyone, for our communities, for the planet.
It is. True anti-fragility is about creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive, not just a lucky few.
So to sum it all up, it's about embracing uncertainty, building optionality, owning our decisions, and making sure our actions are aligned with a bigger sense of ethics and responsibility.
That's it. And remember, a little bit of randomness, it can be a good thing. Keeps us on our toes, forces us to adapt, and in the end, it helps us become stronger, more resilient versions of ourselves.
Well said. That's definitely something to think about. Until next time, folks, stay curious and stay a little bit anti-fragile.